What's one family saying or phrase you heard growing up that still sticks with you?
The thing is, you don't really notice the moment your parents stop seeing you as someone they're responsible for and start seeing you as just a background character in someone else's story, until one day, you're standing in your tiny apartment kitchen, staring at the phone screen after a call that lasted under 7 minutes, realizing that the people who raised you have no intention of catching you if you fall. It's not dramatic, it's not cruel, and that's what makes it worse. It's polite, dismissive, and delivered with the kind of bright, chipper tone reserved for casual weather updates. That's exactly how my mother sounded when she said, "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. But with everything going on with Emma's wedding right now, we just don't have the extra cash. You'll figure it out, you always do." Let me be very clear, I wasn't asking for a handout to blow on nonsense. I wasn't maxing out credit cards or going on shopping sprees or flying to Cancun with my girlfriends. I was asking my parents for help with one damn month of rent, just a temporary cushion while I got my footing after losing one of my biggest clients. And I wasn't even asking for the whole month, just enough to keep me from falling behind. It was humiliating even to ask. I've spent my entire adult life trying not to be a burden, and for the past 15 years, I've done a pretty damn good job of it. But the moment I hit a wall, the first time in my life I needed help as an adult, they basically told me nicely, of course, that I was on my own. I stood there in my kitchen, still holding the phone in my hand, trying to decide what hurt more, the fact that they said no, or the fact that they didn't even hesitate. There wasn't a moment of pause, no, let me talk to your father, no, how bad is it? Just that sugary tone, the one my mom uses when she's trying to say something unpleasant in a pleasant way. You always figure it out. That's what she kept repeating, like it was some kind of compliment. But it didn't feel like a compliment. It felt like a sentence. And the kicker? It's not like they didn't have the money. They were paying for Emma's destination wedding. Not helping with. Paying for. Full stop. Flights, hotel rooms, welcome dinners, a string quartet at the ceremony, the open bar, the villa rental in Lake fucking Como. They were covering it all because she deserves her dream day. Meanwhile, I'm getting collection emails from my landlord, looking at my dwindling savings account, and eating frozen ravioli from the dollar store because the grocery bill is now a luxury. But hey, I'm the one who always figures it out, right? I'll admit, I stood there for a while after the call ended. Not crying. Not throwing anything. Just still. Numb. You ever get so disappointed you just go quiet? That kind of silence, the kind where your brain starts pulling up receipts from 10, 20 years ago. Every time they bailed Emma out of trouble, every time they picked her up early from school because she was too stressed, every time they co-signed a lease for her, helped her with credit card debt, through her birthday parties that looked like Pinterest boards come to life. And me? I was the low-maintenance one. The reliable one. The one who put herself through college on scholarships and side gigs. The one who moved to Chicago alone and figured out how to survive, one freelance job at a time. They called me fierce when I left home at 20, but maybe fierce just meant we're off the hook. I tried not to hate Emma. I really did. It's not her fault she's the favorite. She didn't choose it. But she never turned it down either. She soaked it up. And she never once looked back. Every time we were in the same room, she made me feel like some frumpy extra in her personal rom-com. She was the type who always had a new boyfriend, a new obsession, a new brand partnership, or lifestyle shift. Her life looked curated even when we were kids. And now she was the golden bride, planning a 300-guest wedding across the ocean, posting mood boards on Instagram like she was Vogue's latest cover girl, while I was rationing toilet paper and wondering if I should sell my old laptop on Craigslist. When I told my parents about losing the client, I didn't even ask for help right away. I waited. I waited because I thought maybe they'd offer. Thought maybe, just maybe, they'd say, "We'll help. What do you need?" But they didn't. They asked how Emma was doing. They wanted to know if I was coming to her bridal shower in LA. That's when I knew. I wasn't the protagonist in this family story. I was set dressing. Support staff. The wise older sister who claps politely from the sidelines. So yes, when the time came I asked. Not with tears, not with anger. just with a deep breath and more humility than I probably should have had. And they said no. Sweetly. Cheerfully. Like they were talking about the weather. I got off that call, poured myself the last of the red wine I had left from a friend's visit 6 months ago, and sat on the couch in silence. It wasn't just the money. It was the clarity. The absolute, bone-deep realization that I'd been playing a role in their narrative for years, and they'd never once considered how the story felt from my side. I thought about skipping the wedding. I thought about ghosting them all, blocking the family group chat, disappearing from holidays and birthday calls and check-ins. But then something else took root in me. Something colder. Calmer. I wasn't going to disappear. No, I was going to RSVP, yes. And I was going to be unforgettable. Because if I was no longer a daughter worth helping, then maybe I could be something else entirely. Something they couldn't ignore. And if you've ever had to sit across from the people who raised you and smile while they choose someone else, every time, you'll understand why I stopped asking for space at their table and started building my own. There's something almost surgical about the way a person learns to compartmentalize pain when they've spent their entire life being told, either directly or by omission, that their emotions are less urgent than someone else's celebrations. And in the days that followed that phone call with my parents, the one where they decided that my emergency wasn't quite dramatic enough to disrupt their funding of my sister's destination fairy tale, I felt myself slipping into a version of myself I hadn't met in years, a colder, more calculating version who didn't cry, who didn't explain, who didn't beg, because when you've lived your life being the reliable one, you eventually learn that asking for help will often get you a lecture or a shrug, never a lifeline. I didn't tell anyone at work what was going on because admitting financial strain in a place where everyone was pretending to be thriving felt like the first step toward being irrelevant, and in marketing, once people smell desperation, you're toast. So I smiled, I delivered, I worked overtime even though I wasn't being paid for it, and I kept hoping that maybe, just maybe, something would shift, a new client, a new project. Anything to keep me from sliding deeper into the kind of instability that keeps you up at night counting how many more days you can avoid opening certain emails. Meanwhile, Emma's updates came in like clockwork, perfectly filtered and color-coordinated, every image soaked in soft lighting and expensive nonchalance, and if I sound bitter, it's because I was. Because while I was scraping together cash by pawning a few old rings from college and canceling every subscription I'd ever loved, she was sending out video invites filmed with a drone and casually mentioning that her wedding dress would be flown in from Paris. Because no American designer really captured the silhouette she had in mind. I wanted to mute her. I wanted to block her. But I didn't, and I'll be honest, I didn't because I needed to see it. I needed to look directly at the contrast between our lives and sit with the ugliness of that comparison until it hardened into something useful. It was about 3 days after the rent ultimatum that I sat on the edge of my bed, holding a bowl of dry cereal because the milk had gone bad, staring at a text from my mom that read, "Emma wants to know if you're okay with wearing seafoam green for the bridesmaid dresses. She says it flatters everyone." And I just laughed, actually laughed out loud in that sharp, bitter way that comes out when your body is too tired to cry, and it hit me in that moment that not only were they not thinking about how I was going to stay house next month, they weren't even aware that I might not be able to afford a damn dress. Seafoam green. I could barely afford bread. And you might ask, why didn't I tell them? Why didn't I lay it all out, break down, scream, demand to be heard? But the truth is, when someone has already shown you how much they're willing to care, asking them again just starts to feel like begging for something they've already decided not to give. I didn't want pity. I didn't want them to help because I guilt them into it. I wanted them to want to help me. And they didn't. That night, I opened an old box from college, one I hadn't touched in over a decade, filled with scribbled notebooks and half-filled journals, reminders of a time when I thought writing everything down would somehow protect me from losing myself. And as I flipped through those pages, sarcastic notes, petty sketches of professors, rants about dorm mates, I found one page I'd written during a family vacation that I'd completely forgotten about. It said, "If I ever vanish, no one will notice. Not because they don't love me, but because Emma's always louder." I stared at that sentence for a long time, reading it over and over like it had been written by someone else, someone younger, but just as tired, someone who had seen the pattern early but still held out hope that maybe it would change. It didn't change. And I think that was the moment something shifted in me, not an explosion, not a breakdown, but a slow, deliberate click, like a lock sliding into place, and I started thinking less about how to survive this and more about how to make it count. I wasn't going to grovel. I wasn't going to beg for inclusion. I wasn't going to be their polite disappointment. I was going to go to that wedding. I was going to smile. I was going to raise a glass and make a toast and hug the bride and kiss the groom and play my role to perfection, but I was going to do it on my terms. I was going to turn this performance into a reckoning. I started small. I emailed the bridesmaid coordinator and asked for all the details. I pretended to be excited. I RSVP'd with a little note about how happy I was to celebrate Emma's big day in such a magical setting, and every word I typed felt like I was carving out space for something bigger, something smarter, something they wouldn't see coming until it was already too late. A few days later, I started getting group emails about the bachelorette weekend. Spa packages. Helicopter rides. Optional activities that cost more than my monthly rent. I replied with the same enthusiasm, never once letting on that I was one missed invoice away from having my internet shut off. Because this was going to be the long game. You see, when people stop expecting you to matter, you can use that invisibility like armor. And I was about to become unmissable. I just needed time. And a plan. There's a specific kind of clarity that only comes once you've crossed a line internally, once you've stepped over that invisible boundary between hoping things might get better and deciding that if nothing's going to change, then maybe it's time you stopped playing fair. And as I sat at my kitchen table with bills spread out like a poker hand and the group wedding email thread chirping through my phone every 20 minutes with links to monogrammed robes and must-have travel skincare sets, I knew I had reached that line and then some. I wasn't going to whine. I wasn't going to protest. I was going to let them plan their picture-perfect little European circus while I prepared something far more satisfying, because if they had already decided that I was the one who'd always be fine, the one who didn't need anything, the one who clapped and smiled and kept her bitterness tucked away behind perfectly applied lipstick, then I was going to give them exactly what they wanted, but in a form they'd never forget. The first thing I did was start paying attention. Not just to the wedding plans, but to Emma's online presence, her tone, her cadence, the rhythm of her self-made brand, the curated chaos of her lifestyle content, and all the ways she had learned to package herself as someone enviable but relatable. A girl who did yoga retreats in Bali and complained about flight delays from business class. A girl who never acknowledged privilege but wore it like perfume, something invisible but unmistakable. I scrolled through her Instagram with a kind of focused detachment I hadn't had before, taking notes the way you would if you were preparing to interview someone you loathed but couldn't avoid. She had built an audience on authenticity, or at least the illusion of it, and I began to notice the cracks, the way she reused certain captions, the inconsistencies in her travel timelines, the occasional comment that got deleted when someone questioned how she afforded something. And I wasn't about to go nuclear, wasn't about to ruin her life or humiliate her publicly, but I was absolutely going to remind her and my parents, and anyone else who had written me off as the supporting character, that I still had teeth. My first move was small, almost laughably so, which made it perfect. I created a fake account, nothing sinister, just a soft, sweet profile with generic photos of books and coffee, something that blended into the background of the internet. And I used it to message Emma pretending to be a skincare brand interested in a potential collaboration. I asked for her email. She responded in under 5 minutes. The email I sent back contained a fake brief for a campaign that required her to post a video within 72 hours using a product that didn't exist, tagged with a fake brand, and featuring a very specific piece of licensed music. She followed it to the letter. The video went up. The music was flagged within hours. Her account was temporarily restricted. She panicked. Called our mother. Our mother called me. I said I hadn't seen the post. I didn't laugh. I didn't even smile. I just made a note, She still trusted too easily. Still assumed the world would catch her when she stumbled. The next move was more subtle. I started planting seeds, just tiny comments, always in passing, always with a smile. I heard Emma's dress is couture, isn't that wild? I just hope customs doesn't hold it up too long. Or, oh, I love that they're doing a fireworks display, though I did read something about restrictions in that part of Italy. I'm sure they'll figure it out. I said these things to cousins, to family friends, always with a tone of casual curiosity, never with malice, but with enough weight that it made its way back to Emma, who started calling our mother in full-fledged spirals, questioning whether certain things were true or if I was just being my usual passive-aggressive self. I wasn't being passive. I was being strategic. There's a difference. And every time she questioned me, every time she narrowed her eyes at something I said or side-eyed me in a group text, I acted confused, hurt even, like I couldn't believe she would think I'd say something like that. My mother told me I was being sensitive. That Emma was just under a lot of pressure. That I should try to be supportive. So I doubled down. I bought the bridesmaid dress. Seafoam green. I hated it, but I paid for it. Full price. No complaints. I let them all see the receipt. And then I sent a different dress to be tailored, something striking, something bold, something completely off the suggested palette, which I planned to wear for the welcome dinner, because technically it wasn't the wedding day. And technically they couldn't tell me what to wear to a meal I was paying for myself. The dress was crimson red. Floor length. Fitted. Dramatic without being tacky. It would photograph like fire. Every time I got a new email from Emma's planner, asking for RSVP confirmations, for meal preferences, for passport copies and travel insurance, I responded immediately. Perfectly. Professionally. I was the dream guest. The perfect older sister. I didn't offer any help, didn't ask any questions. I just kept saying yes. And then I started whispering. At a family brunch, I let slip that I wasn't sure if I could afford the trip, but I was going to make it work because I couldn't imagine missing my sister's big day. I said it loud enough for the right people to hear. Loud enough for the guilt to start creeping in around the edges. The looks began to shift. Aunts and uncles started pulling me aside, asking if I was doing okay, offering to let me crash in their rental villa to save money. I smiled and declined. Said I had it covered. I wanted the struggle to be known but not pitted. Because this wasn't about money anymore. It was about narrative. It was about taking back my place in the story. They thought I was just coming to attend the wedding. They had no idea I was coming to rewrite it. And when that moment arrived, when I stepped off the plane in Italy and saw their faces, there wasn't going to be a single doubt left in their minds. The forgotten daughter, the one who always figured it out, had finally decided to stop being quiet. And the show was just getting started. There is a kind of anticipation that builds when you've been quietly crafting your moment for weeks, when every smile you've offered has been rehearsed, every word you've spoken has carried weight, and every gesture you've made has been a thread in a larger tapestry that nobody else realizes is even being woven until it's already wrapped around their necks. And as I stepped off the train in Milan, suitcase in one hand, confidence pulled tight across my shoulders like armor, I knew, without a flicker of doubt, that whatever this wedding was supposed to be, it would not unfold the way they had pictured it. Not because I was going to sabotage it with fire or chaos or some juvenile act of rebellion, but because I had finally accepted a truth that had once terrified me. They had never seen me as central, never even considered me in the spotlight. And now I was going to force them, gently, elegantly, but undeniably, to look straight at me and feel the weight of everything they'd chosen to ignore. I arrived at the villa a day earlier than expected, not to cause trouble, but because I knew Emma would hate the lack of control it gave her. She liked to choreograph everything, down to the way guests entered the lobby and how the champagne was handed out upon arrival, so I bypassed her script entirely, took a cab from the station, checked in with the staff, and was sitting under a shaded pergola with a glass of sparkling water and a pair of oversized sunglasses by the time the main party began to arrive. When she stepped out of the car, all sun-kissed and high-strung in linen that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her expression flickered just briefly: confusion, irritation, something she smoothed over quickly with a tight-lipped smile, but I caught it. And it was enough to tell me I was already doing something right. The villa itself was exactly the kind of obscene fairy tale she'd always dreamed of: arched balconies, rose petals in the fountains, waitstaff in designer uniforms that probably had to be shipped from somewhere absurd. And yet, even as the rest of the guests oohed and awed, I couldn't shake the feeling that this whole thing was teetering on the edge of collapse. Not because of me, not yet, but because perfection is a fragile beast, and when you build your world on shallow foundations, on curated photos and controlled narratives, and the assumption that everyone will behave exactly as you expect, it doesn't take much to make the entire thing tremble. I wore the crimson dress to the welcome dinner. It wasn't just red, it was blood red, deep and rich and cut in a way that flattered me more than anything I'd worn in years. I paired it with a pair of simple gold earrings and no apology. When I walked into that courtyard, heads turned. Not dramatically, not all at once, but subtly, gradually, like a ripple moving across a still lake, and I saw the expressions shift from casual politeness to something else entirely. Admiration. Curiosity. A whisper of discomfort. And when my mother saw me, my own mother, who had barely acknowledged my financial situation a month prior, her jaw tightened just slightly before she stood and smiled too broadly, too falsely, and said, "Well, don't you look dramatic tonight?" I smiled back with all the warmth I could muster and said, "It's a dramatic setting." Felt appropriate. Emma barely looked at me during dinner. She spent most of the evening directing staff, repositioning flower arrangements, whispering to her fiancé with the kind of intensity that signals either passion or panic, though in her case, it was always both, and I played the role perfectly. Engaging with relatives I hadn't seen in years, graciously accepting compliments, never once alluding to the chaos that had led to my presence here. It was the calm before the storm, and I wanted every single person in that courtyard to feel it in their bones. The speech came later, during the toasts, when people had relaxed just enough, wine loosening their posture and bringing color to their cheeks, and the mic was passed from hand to hand like a sacred relic, each person offering glowing stories about love and fate and the beauty of two souls finding each other in a world that too often tears us apart. When it reached me, I could feel the pause, the subtle tension as people wondered what I might say, especially after such an entrance, and I stood slowly, cradling my glass of white wine, and gave them a smile that felt like the edge of a blade. "I'll keep it short," I said, pausing just long enough to make them lean in, because if there's one thing I've learned from Emma, it's that timing is everything. A few people laughed. Emma didn't. I've had the honor of watching Emma grow into the woman she is now: resilient, radiant, relentless in her pursuit of the life she's imagined for herself. And I say imagined because truly no one dreams louder than Emma. She doesn't just hope, she constructs, she curates, she manifests. And she's very good at making people believe that they're part of that dream. Even when, sometimes, they're not. That landed like a stone in water. Stillness rippled out from every table. But here we are, all of us, witnesses to this vision she's built, and whether we're front row or somewhere near the back, we're all in the frame now, aren't we? So here's to Emma and Jake. May your life be as beautiful as this villa, as curated as this dinner, and as lasting as the memory of everyone here tonight. I lifted my glass, sipped, and sat. Silence. Then polite clapping. Then louder. But the atmosphere had shifted, just slightly, like someone had turned the thermostat down a degree. Later, after the plates were cleared and the music turned up and people began to dance, my mother came over and said, voice low and tight, "Was that really necessary?" I looked her in the eye and said, "You asked me to be here. I'm just doing what's expected." She didn't respond. Just walked away, the hem of her silk blouse fluttering in the breeze. And as the music played and Emma posed for photos and the night stretched on into something that looked, from the outside, like joy, I stood in the shadows and watched it all: my family, their rituals, their loyalties, and I realized, with something close to peace, that I had finally stopped waiting for them to change. I didn't need their approval anymore. I just needed them to know that I was no longer invisible. And once that truth settled in, I walked back to my room, slipped out of the red dress, and slept like a woman who had finally chosen herself. Because I had more to say. And the main event hadn't even started yet. There is something profoundly quiet about the aftermath of confrontation, a stillness that isn't peaceful or calming but heavy, almost paralyzing in its intensity, and after I returned from the wedding, that surreal, absurd, exquisitely staged performance that was equal parts theater and eulogy, I found myself waking each morning not with rage or sadness or even regret, but with this thick, unmoving fog of understanding that things would never return to the way they had been before, not because anything exploded or shattered violently, but because I had finally stopped pretending to believe in the version of my family I had clung to for so long, and once that illusion disintegrated, there was no going back. I didn't cry on the plane ride home, nor did I feel the strange hollowness that sometimes follows a cathartic moment. Instead, I simply stared out the window, watching the clouds break apart into pale streaks over the Atlantic, and felt something close to silence settle into my chest. A silence that had nothing to do with defeat and everything to do with choice. When I landed in Chicago, my apartment felt smaller than before, but somehow also more mine. The chipped paint near the kitchen counter, the squeaky hinge on the hallway closet, the slight tilt in the window frame that never quite sealed properly, all those things I used to complain about now felt like proof of something, that I had built this life myself. One uneven brick at a time, and while it might not have been much, and while it certainly didn't shimmer like Emma's curated existence, it was real. It was earned. It had substance. There was no pretense here, no borrowed luxury, no fragile performances for the approval of strangers. It was just me, and I was still standing. The week after the wedding, I didn't hear from my parents. Not a call. Not a text. Not even a vague email asking if I got home safely. Part of me expected that silence, but another part of me, the small, stubborn part that still wanted to be someone's daughter in the most traditional, childlike sense, kept checking my phone late at night, as if maybe they were just waiting for things to settle. As if maybe this would all blow over the way so many family tensions had before. But this was different. This wasn't a fight. It was a reckoning. It was a shift in gravity, and they must have felt it too, because when the silence finally broke, it came not in the form of apology or acknowledgement, but in a voicemail from my mother that started with her usual breathy chirp, "Hi, sweetheart," and then dissolved into a kind of fragile defensiveness that told me everything I needed to know. She said they missed me. She said the wedding had been a lot, and that Emma was still recovering from the stress, and that she hoped I didn't take things too personally because everyone had a different kind of pressure on them, and you know how families are. Sometimes people don't know how to show love the right way. She didn't mention the rent. She didn't mention the call that started all of this. She didn't mention the toast I gave or the expression on my face when she walked away from me at that dinner. She tiptoed around the truth like it was a sleeping bear, never realizing it had already woken up and walked away. I didn't call her back. And when Thanksgiving came, I didn't board a flight to Ohio, didn't pack a bag, didn't scroll through train schedules or feel a pang of longing as I passed through the holiday section of the grocery store. I spent that day exactly as I wanted, alone, unapologetically, with a bottle of decent red wine, a rotisserie chicken, and a Netflix queue that asked nothing of me. The phone rang a few times. I let it go to voicemail. At some point, Emma posted a picture of her and her husband, dressed like a catalog couple in coordinated flannel, standing in front of a rustic fireplace with their puppy and a caption about gratitude. I didn't like it. I didn't roll my eyes either. I just scrolled past it like I would any other stranger's post, and I think that's when I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply done. Christmas came. More silence. Then a card in the mail, thick cardstock, gold trim, a photo of Emma holding a newborn. Apparently, she hadn't told anyone she was pregnant, or maybe I just hadn't been on the list of people who needed to know. There was a note in her handwriting on the back. Her name is Sophia. I hope someday you'll be part of her life. Love you. I stared at it for a long time, not out of emotion, but out of something colder, harder to name, something like calculation. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood that the invitation wasn't really about the baby. It was about the story. It was about casting me, once again, in a familiar role, the estranged sister who comes around, the aunt who forgives, the woman who swallows her pride for the sake of tradition. But I didn't want that part anymore. I wasn't going to play their script just because it made them feel better about themselves. So I pinned the card to the fridge, not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder. A souvenir. A silent symbol of everything I had finally let go. I didn't write back. And the strangest thing was nobody followed up. Nobody chased me down. Nobody stormed into my inbox demanding answers or apologies. They let the silence stretch. Maybe they were relieved. Maybe they didn't know what to say. Maybe they were hoping, as so many families do, that time would smooth over the cracks and allow everyone to pretend nothing had really broken. But I knew better. Because sometimes distance isn't punishment. Sometimes it's protection. Sometimes it's the cleanest, kindest boundary you can draw when the people you love refuse to see you clearly, when they insist on defining you by the version of you that's easiest to manage. And now, when people ask if I'm close with my family, I smile and say, not really, with no bitterness, no apology, and no need to explain. Because I have built something better than closeness. I've built truth. I've built peace. I've built a life that is entirely, beautifully, imperfectly mine. Still, late at night, sometimes I wonder if something happened to me, if I hit a wall again, lost a job, got sick, fell into that pit where you start questioning whether you really can keep going. Would anyone be there? Would they notice? Would they care enough to cross the silence? And even as I ask the question, I know the answer. I just don't know if I care anymore.